Well, welcome everybody to the Groundswell show, and I am so excited to have my good friend Kyle Eich here. Welcome, Kyle.
Thanks, Dave. Good to be here, man.
It's so great to have you on the show. And Major Kyle Eich is a fighter pilot with the U.S. Air Force, and now he's transitioning to commercial piloting. But Kyle, we've been good friends, and we were best friends in high school, and you were one of my greatest friends of all time. And we recently reconnected, and when we did, I thought, oh my gosh, people need to hear from you, and I'd love to have more conversations with you. So thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, buddy. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. And yeah, I agree. Our friendship has been long spanning, even though, yeah, sure, there was a little gap in time where we had a chance to communicate, but good friendships last beyond the years like that. So
You're one of those great friends that the saying holds true, where like great friends, you might not talk to them for a while, but when you do, you pick right back up where you
that's
left
right.
off. And
It's like we hung out
you're one of
yesterday.
those few people that's very true, and I
Yeah.
so appreciate that about you. And so I'm so grateful for you. And you flew F-15s. You're a fighter pilot, and in this show, we're all about answering the question: how do you forward God's kingdom in the 165 hours you're not in church? And I want to know from you, how did you forward God's kingdom as a fighter pilot? Because I know you're an on fire for God Christian, you love Jesus, but you've been serving the U.S. military and the U.S. as a country in this really specialized capacity that very few people ever get a chance to. And so I'm really curious to pick your brain about how you served God in that way, and how you even got there. I mean, how is it that you became a fighter pilot? I know some of the early story, but talk about that even from childhood. How did you want to, like, what was that like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, so it did start. There's you'll talk to different people and how they got started, and some of them didn't dream about it as a kid, but I did. It really was triggered by a couple things in my life. My dad, as in, a lot of boyhood dreams developing as, their father spurring that on in them. So my dad started taking me to air shows. We talk about jets. We, look at books and pictures of jets and things like that. And then my uncle, so my dad's oldest brother, also had a real excitement about aerospace and fighter jets in particular. And so he kind of helped that spur that on in me as well, just by his nature and wanting to be around that stuff. And he actually had career aspirations to go to the Air Force Academy and be a pilot. And I think along the way, I don't know, it was like eyesight or just a few things kind of steered him away from that. But he always had kind of that desire, and that's his influence is really what kind of put it into perspective for me that, like, that's something you can really dream about and aspire to be. So between the two of them, and then just other mentors along the way, that's kind of what got me started on that path and made me want to become a pilot in general. And then honestly, man, it was. We could talk about this more here. I'm sure we will, but I think that God um, often calls us by giving us a desire to do something. It's
Hmm.
uh, there's also other cases. You look at Moses in the Bible, and he did not have a desire to go speak to Pharaoh, and so that doesn't work out for everyone that way. But for me specifically, I feel like he planted that desire in my heart. And what ultimately spurred me on, or ultimately pushed me to make that final decision to go pursue this career, was a mission trip in Romania when we were back in ninth grade. In fact, the beginnings of our friendship, we went with the youth group at our church, and man, when I just got over there and saw how things were in other countries for the first time, it just um, caused me to kind of overflow with this pride and patriotism for our country and wanting to give back and be part of that. So that's what sealed the deal for me. And from then on, it was, one foot for the other to pursue that career.
Oh, it's interesting. I didn't know that about the mission trip, and
Yeah.
that's really powerful.
Yeah. It was
Wow.
pretty wild experience. So
And I love your summary statement. Like, God often calls us by putting the desires in our heart, and that's a really, really powerful statement. I think that's really helpful for a lot of people who are trying to discern in what's God calling me to next. It's interesting. Calling is interesting because people face the calling question at different stages in their life. Like
Yeah.
we're talking about early years, childhood to career, but I think even people who are facing retirement will often ask themselves the same question, like, what's God calling me to next now that the career is over?
Yeah.
And that's a profound statement to say, hey, check out the desires in your heart. If you're
Hmm.
really serving the Lord, those can be a faithful tell of what to do. And I think was it 6 years old that you first wanted to be a fighter pilot? Is that when your dad and uncle started to, or it really took you?
Yeah.
What
You
age?
know, that's actually a good question. That's probably about right. I, I couldn't pinpoint an exact age or date or time. It was just like a process,
Mhm.
you know, and I mean, whatever age young boys are able to comprehend and understand
Mhm.
jets and tractors and trains and things like that, I think that's
Yeah.
probably when it started. My earliest memories are definitely after we were 5 years. I was 5 years old because I can remember being in the house we lived in, and the things that, you know, little with these little like I don't know, quarter sheet size little fact cards about fighter jets that I had in a little container in my closet that my parents had given me. And I remember that being like, I just sit there and look through those, you know, till the sun will go
Yeah.
down. And so yeah, it was really early on. Definitely 5 or 6 years old is probably when that began.
That's amazing. And so,
Yeah.
um, when we were in high school and you were pursuing this, we were both applying to colleges, and you were applying to the Air Force Academy, and that's a really exclusive process to even get accepted to the Air Force Academy, and then the whole journey to become a fighter pilot. And very few people make it. Can you talk about that journey for you, and especially how is it that how that you felt God leading you and guiding you along the way?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I've got a few things that story wise
Yeah.
for that. So initially, just so that people kind of know where I went from there, I pursued initially the Air Force Academy, but then, as you know, I ended up going to a state school in New York.
Hmm.
The Air Force Academy, just like you said, is very elite, very difficult to get into. There's a whole process. You need like your congressman to give you an appointment and all this stuff. And frankly, between
You
you and
did
me,
that
and
though. Like you went through it. I remember like the military officers like interviewing me as your friend as a
that's right.
character reference.
So
Like you did all that stuff.
it was actually different. So I initially went looking at the academy, but I changed course to go to do Air Force ROTC.
Hmm.
And the reason they interviewed you is because I was applying for a scholarship so that they would pay for
Mm.
school. So it's a similar process, but slightly less involved than trying to go to the Air Force Academy. And so that all ended up working out, and I was fortunate and blessed to get a scholarship for school. And then I just did, you know, the 4 year school thing, and then commissioned into the Air Force and went on from there. So um, but going backwards a little bit to your question, kind of the way that God was leading me there. So what ended up when I made the decision not to go to the academy and that I was going to do Air Force ROTC and go to, you know, a normal person school, if you will, uh, I had three options, you know. And I remember the school that I ended up going to, the state school there, was really the tertiary. It was like last on my list, and it was like my safety school, if you will, even though it was the hardest one to get into, which is ironic. And I had a Gideon moment back in like 11th grade, and I was like, God, if you want me to go to this school, then I'll get the scholarship that only allows me to go to that school, because there was like there are different tiers of Air Force scholarships, and there was one scholarship that would only pay my tuition if I went to an in-state school. My other schools were like Gordon College in Massachusetts, and I think Cedarville University in Ohio. And so I had these other schools that were out of state and really expensive. Long story short, I get the scholarship that only allows me to go to this state school. Go figure, right? And I remember that moment opening the letter. In fact, it was right after we were at our friend's Bible study down the street on a Saturday night, and I opened the letter, and sure enough, it was that school. And I just remember feeling disappointed, but also this like sense of relief slash peace slash finality, almost like, well, I prayed about this, and this was the decision I was supposed to make, and so
Mhm.
that's the school I'm going to. And the next day, that was it. Like I decided I'm going to that school. And then fast forward, you know, it ended up, dude. That's like the story that I tell people for how God really just orchestrated everything in my life, because I ended up meeting my wife at that school. I ended up realizing that school is it was funny. Uh, the funny thing is, I actually went to the secular school, right, versus the Christian colleges that I had picked out, and
Mhm.
my faith grew more there than it would have for sure. Those other
I
schools.
remember that. I
Yeah,
remember like because we'd visit each other. We were actually fairly close, and so I went to a Bible school
that's right.
nearby.
Yeah,
So I want to be, pastor preacher.
yeah,
And yeah, I remember you were like more on fire every time you come back from
yeah,
break from that, that public college. I thought, what? I was
yeah.
really happy about it, but it was so cool to watch.
Mind blowing, man. It was a crazy experience because when you get into a battleground like that, in a secular campus where it's really very anti-God in many ways, I was so blessed to have a good group of really solid Christians around me
Mhm.
that I met through university there, and one of them he was a biology major, and he now actually has a ministry that he's running that's very focused on like creation science and apologetics and things. And so, um, because of that, that really is what grounded my faith because I got really into that and learned a lot about apologetics and creation. And that's actually become a real passion of mine now. And fast forward to my time in the Air Force, if it hadn't been for that, I, I, I trust that God would have, kept me close in other ways to my faith, but that really is what grounded me in college to then prepare me to be in the midst of being a fighter pilot and having a firm foundation in that I know that there is no way that this world exists without God creating it. Um, Therefore, my faith is strong no matter what
Yeah.
trials and tribulations come up. So
And then what I hear in your story too is so amazing is like where God calls you, He provides for you, and He'll strengthen your faith along the way, no matter what the environment is. Like, looking back, I went to Christian schools. We were like worried about losing our faith in college, and I guess if you're
yeah,
worried about that, you probably won't. But
yeah,
uh, and I think there's a lot of people who are watching this who are, they know people who've lost their faith in college, but so it's very real risk. But like you said, where you sense God calling you had that peace. God made a way for it to actually work the other way and strengthen your faith. So powerful.
yeah,
So I want to know. So along the way, I remember you were doing Air Force ROTC, and towards the end, it started ramping up into where they're going to actually place you. And so there was all these cutoff points where either make the cut to be that pilot or not. Talk about that process and how God was involved with that.
yeah, yeah. So that process it really begins when you start ROTC as a freshman or a sophomore. There's different gates where you can come into the program. But the real defining, the moment where it all really kind of starts to get real is your junior year, because that's when you put in your app. You basically just put in an application, for lack of better terms, to say that, hey, I want to be a pilot. Uh, then there's a handful of tests you have to take. There's an Air Force officer qualifying test, it's called, and it's like an SAT on steroids, and you sit in a room for 5 hours and take a standard test. And there's a couple components to that are different than an SAT. They're focused on like pilot skills and things, and reading maps and doing math and stuff. So you have to get a minimum qualifying score on that, and then you have to take basically an aptitude test that involves essentially a video game to make sure that you got some hand-eye coordination and you can do more than one thing at once. And then they also take any flight hours that you've had outside of ROTC if you've flown any airplanes, and they aggregate that all into a score that they call a PICSM. I don't know what that stands for. It's an acronym, but you can look it up online. And then they send that up with your application, and then a bunch of people somewhere in the country sit down with all the applications, and then you get racked and stacked. And then, hey, we got this many pilot slots for these many people, and if you were above the line and made the cut, you get a slot, and if not, you're either an alternate or you're told thanks, no thanks. Go do something else.
Pound
Through that
sand. Yeah.
process, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's the colloquial term. That's right. So if you throughout that process is really the only thing you can do, and the only thing that I did is you just try to do well in ROTC, which really just means you try to work on your leadership skills and try to be a good leader amongst your peers. And
What does
dude,
that mean to you though? Like be a good, just a caveat, like
that's
be a good
yeah.
leader. What does that mean to you?
So for me, it's changed a lot. I'll tell you that.
Mm.
In college, I look back to my college and my leadership, and you're learning, and you're all gung ho, And back then, to me, it meant being in charge and earning the respect of the people around you, so that you could essentially motivate them to achieve a common goal. Right? That's kind of like your standard leadership um, book answer, if you will. Since then, I've come to see it as my my innate leadership style is a servant leadership. And for me now, leadership is taking care of people, simply put.
Wow.
Taking care of the people around me, and then taking care of other people that may not necessarily be directly impacted by me. And I think if you take care of people as a leader, then you're going to empower them to do the things that they need to do to get whatever job done you're trying to reach towards. Not to mention, I would argue that Jesus is a servant. I think you'd probably agree with me, and as would most Christians. And I think that emulates Jesus' style the best. Not that you can't emulate Jesus as a different type of leader. I just found that being a servant or trying to be a servant towards the people around you, particularly when you're leading them, versus being the kind of leader where you're like, oh, you're going to do this because I told you to, or that kind of style. It just doesn't work. It doesn't resonate with people. And so I think I really migrated from early on feeling like, in fact, I told somebody one time, like, you need to listen to me and do what I say. Uh, Massive regret. And I actually found that individual. He was in my squadron 7 years later. And from the day that I said that to him, I held on to that and told myself I was going to apologize to him for it when I found him. And sure enough, he walked down the hall one day. I show up in a new squadron. I'm like, holy smokes. And that's the first thing I said to him. And he had tears in his eyes when he left the squadron because him and I were so close.
Wow.
And had gone back so far, that it was very redeeming, which was great. So anyway, all that to say, to answer your question, as a leader, being a servant leader is really where I found my stride. And then owning your mistakes, as in that story, if you make a mistake as a leader, you just got to own it, and it's okay. You're going to make mistakes. But if you try to beat around the bush and pretend you didn't make the mistake, or make an excuse for why you made it, you're just going to lose people's respect. And then to bring this all together, as a Christian, if you treat people that way and you lose their respect as a leader, then you're going to be a bad witness. So I think that all comes back to how you represent Christ.
There it is in a nutshell. That's so powerful. I love how you won that guy over, and wow. So
yeah, when I just
wow.
to not give myself too much credit, when I apologized to him, he was like, I don't even remember that. And so it wasn't like it was a big deal.
But you
Part of
did
me
it for
thinks
you,
that he
not for
probably,
him.
yeah, and part of me thinks that he probably did remember it. But in that moment, I find when you apologize to someone like that, they melt. It doesn't matter how mad they were in the instance. If you own it and apologize to someone, it's like it all melts away, and it's just a really healing thing. So you have to do it meaningfully. You can't just apologize to apologize, obviously. But anyway, yeah, it was great. So
Wow. So back to the journey to pilot. You got all these tests, all these aptitude tests, and then
you get put your application in and you sit and wait. And
you got in.
Yeah, I did. I remember getting a phone call sitting in humanities class one day, and I walked out to go to the bathroom, which was really just to check my voicemail, and it was the unit telling me that congrats, you got a pilot slot.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was it. All that hard work culminated in that moment.
How did that feel?
Initially, I mean, it was amazing. It just felt like it was becoming real. So all along the way, you're just putting one foot in front of the other, right, to achieve this process, right? And so I've hit on a few of the things, but really it's an everyday process of like getting up and working hard in high school and getting good grades and all those kinds of things, and then doing the research to figure out like how do I get into ROTC and do all these things. So without getting long winded, it felt like it was, man, this is actually happening, versus all along the way you're just one foot in front of the other, day by day, just like I don't know if this is actually going to work out. And frankly, dude, I always thought of fighter pilots as the cream of the crop. And I was like, I am not the cream of the crop. So I am not going to probably make this happen, but I'm going to try anyway. And for anyone out there listening that has ever thought that, I'm tell you, I am not the cream of the crop. I tell people I'm average on my best day. And so I can tell you that if you just have the drive and the desire to do it, and obviously if God ordains it, then it's going to happen, whether or not you are a high powered individual or you're average like me and have bad hair. So it's just the way it works.
So wow. So I'm just absorbing all the things you're saying because it's really valuable. Maybe you think you're average, but I have a different opinion of you.
Oh, thanks.
Um,
But
and even what you're saying, I think what you're saying is really helpful for people because it's like it doesn't really matter whether you think you're special or average or not. It's what you do with it. And
that's right.
you're like you described this faithful follow through of working hard and researching and going for it is really the most important thing, which you did, and leaving it up to God. Now, in that year, you were saying that, like, I remember talking to you, and you said like there was less pilot slots that year because they were downsizing things. Is that true? And how did that
Yeah,
affect?
I can't remember exactly, but I do remember there were some issues with Manning, and they had too many people, and there were some backlogs and things with training. I.e., what I mean by that is there was just too many people, like you said. So I think it was somewhat competitive. Um, Prior to that, it had been probably more competitive. So I think I kind of hit it was an average level of difficulty to get in to get a pilot slot, um, but not unachievable by any means. So
But then there was other cutoffs to like become a combat pilot.
that's
Talk
right.
about that.
Yeah. So when you first find out you're going to get a pilot slot, that's like it's like the beginning of the mountain, right? Like you're at base camp at
Hmm.
Everest, and you're like, I got a long ways to go. So just to quickly step through after that, you got to go to a medical exam. That's like a 2-day thing in Ohio, and it's very extensive. And they poke and prod you and find all the ways that maybe you wouldn't be able to cut it as a pilot and any health issues. I was fortunate and blessed to make through that unscathed. There was no issues, and so that's the next cut, kind of towards becoming a combat pilot. And then from there, it's really just graduate college and then go off to pilot training.
Hmm.
And then once you get to pilot training, there's a few. It's changed since I went through, so I'll try to kind of talk kind of a mix of things. When I went through, I got there, and then you go through an initial flight screening, they call it, in Colorado, where you fly a small airplane for about 20 hours, and you need to be able to solo it safely to make it through that training. Now that training is a little different. I won't speak to it because I'm not an expert on it. But once you get through that initial training, then you basically have a year of pilot training. And so you spend a year flying a couple different aircraft. I was fortunate to basically, in order to become a fighter pilot, you have to have trained in the T-38, which is a fighter jet trainer. So everyone starts out in the T-6, which is basically a prop airplane. You do about 5 months in that, and then after you get done with that, you're racked and strapped with your peers. And then anyone that wants to go fly fighters, puts that they want to go to T-38s or whatever, and then you do what's called a track select, where however many T-38 or fighter pilots they need, they'll take that many out of this class from the top, in the ranking. If you make the cut, you go to T-38s. Otherwise, you go on to, at the time it was the T1, which is like basically a private jet, business jet looking trainer
Hmm.
jet. And but those of us that the top, I think there was 5 of us that got the T-38, and so you go do another 5 months in the T-38, which is basically learning how to fly a jet. And then once you get through that, depending on how well you do, you make a dream sheet, we call it, where you put, number 1 through however many airplanes are available. And if you want to be a fighter pilot, you'd obviously put the fighter jets at the top of that list. If you don't want to do that, then you'd put something else.
Hmm.
Um, and then
How'd it
once you
go
get
for
done with
you?
that, so for me, yep, there is a third option that typically people don't want to do. In the Air Force, we call it the dirty F word. It's FAIP, which is an acronym. FAIP stands for First Assignment Instructor Pilot. And so what that means is you stay at pilot training for the next 3 years as your first assignment, and you teach at pilot training. So you've just graduated pilot training. Now you go to a training course for 4 months and you teach. So I was selected to do that. For me personally, that was actually really exciting because I knew I wanted to teach. I wasn't really sure what fighter jet I wanted to fly, and I didn't feel super confident in my abilities coming out of T-38s. So it was a period of seasoning for me, which was fantastic.
Hmm.
I found in that 3-year assignment that I have a real passion and desire to teach people. I love teaching. So it was really God's blessing in my life to get that assignment, because I wouldn't have known any of that about myself without going through that.
Hmm.
So that was amazing. Uh, did that for 3 years. And then from there, again, you get racked and stacked amongst all your peers that are instructor pilots there. And then that's where you put, this is my first aircraft through whatever. And so that was finally the point where I put F-15E Strike Eagles as my number 1 aircraft choice with a bunch of other ones behind it, and I was fortunate to be get selected for the F-15E. And then from there, it was just the rest is history. I go to training for that, and then that's about 9 months plus another 3 months once you get to your squadron. So about a year of training, and then you go to war. So
Talk about that. What was the greatest joy of being an F-15 pilot, and what was the greatest difficulty?
it's a good question. I'll tell you the greatest difficulty is, and there's a lot of difficult things about it. The training is challenging. The greatest difficulty about being a fighter pilot is something I don't think people realize. You watch Top Gun, which most people are familiar with, and that's kind of their reference for being a fighter pilot. Um, it's not just about the flying. You're not just flying an airplane and raging around the skies and going fast. The flying is tertiary, is secondary, not even secondary. It's like last. You're not even thinking about the flying. It's like um, the focus is on the tactics and the employing the jet as a weapon system. So what I mean by that is you're while you're flying the airplane, you're running a radar, which is like a screen just has a screen in the cockpit that shows you all the stuff that's out there. And then you're trying to move a bunch of buttons and switches to take radar locks. And then you're deciding, okay, can I shoot this person? Can I not shoot this person with a missile? Or we're trying to target something on the ground and you're worried about, okay, where are the friendlies and where are the bad guys? And am I bombing the right thing? And am I not? Am I even clear to release this bomb? And then meanwhile, you're worried about the other airplanes that are in the sky. Um, there's just a lot of things going on in the cockpit that aren't flying related. So flying, you really don't get to enjoy and sit and enjoy the flying. It's just a world of other things happening. So
So
that was
many
the hardest part
details.
for me. That's right. There was a ton of details and there's a ton of things you got to memorize and know. And I won't bore you with all that. But the hardest part, to answer your question, was the tactics and all the other stuff outside of the flying. The greatest joy for me, the best moment of my career was April 18th, 2019, day after my wife's birthday, coming home from my first deployment. I'd been gone for almost 7 months at that point, and being able to fly a jet across the world essentially to come back home from that deployment it was like the culmination of everything I'd ever desired and worked for. To be able to have gone to war and then come back and land and have my wife, greet me at the fighter, literally at the bottom of the ladder when I shut the jet off. And man, that was just the deployment itself was cool and it was exciting, but coming home from it was just really the best moment of my career. That
Wow.
was really fun.
Wow.
So
That's so powerful. It's just cool. I love hearing about your stories and your thought process. So, to be specific, like what were the combat scenarios that you fought in that people might know about,
um,
or that
there's
you're allowed to say?
I yeah, I guess the biggest thing. So back in 2018, 2019, when I did that deployment, that was really when ISIS was a real hotbed over there in Syria, and so uh, big picture view, we essentially were over there flying and trying to help eradicate ISIS.
Okay.
We were there at a time when at the time President Trump had basically announced that we were going to leave Syria, and so there was a big push to do as much as we could with the time that we had left over there. Turns out that ended up not happening. Obviously, as we see, we're still over there doing some things, but that was essentially that time period when the president had announced we were leaving. We're going to be in Syria anymore. If people remember that was the time frame I was over there. So there was just a lot of ISIS was still a significant threat. They had established their caliphate in the eastern part of Syria, and so we were trying to essentially, if you looked at a map at that time of ISIS territory along the Euphrates River, there was just a swath of red, which was all their territory, and we were essentially just trying to decrease the amount of red over there and make that map look, you know, not red anymore with ISIS territory. Uh, and so that's what we did, and we were able to achieve that, which was pretty cool. So
That's awesome.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, so how bringing it back to the kingdom, as all this is you serving the Lord.
that's right.
Um, how did you forward God's kingdom as a fighter pilot in this space, and how did, I guess another more specific question is, how did you represent Jesus while doing this? Uh,
Yeah. Um, well, I'll tell you, I had better days. I had good days and bad days, right? As a
Sure.
standard human. So, I do not profess to be this, holy Christian that was a constant representation of Christ. I absolutely made mistakes, but in general, well, maybe not in general, but my desire was always to. I had this mission statement for myself that I still try to adhere to today, and it's not necessarily a Bible verse or anything, but it was to be an asset to the people around me, and that was
Mm,
derived from my desire to be a light for Christ. And so I tried to live every day from the standpoint of, so whatever you do, basically do it all for the glory of God. And I felt like the way to do that was to make sure that I'm being an asset to the people around me and helping the people around me so
mm,
that they can see that I care about them and that I want to serve them and there to help them. And I always tried to make sure I never said things like, that's not my job. I'm not going to do that. I never, I never wanted someone to think that I wasn't going to do something, wholeheartedly. Um, and that I wasn't going to do something to help someone just when people were looking, i.e., I wasn't going to do something just for the credit. I was going to do something um, because I wanted to truly be helpful to them, be an asset.
mm.
And I felt like that was the best way I could represent Christ because really that's how Christ lived in a lot of ways, is being an asset to people around him. Obviously, he was an asset to all of
Mm,
us across all of history. Um,
mhm.
and so I thought that was my little minute way I could do that. And then interweaved in there, then people hopefully saw something different, and then it would give me at times, opportunities to share my faith. And the coolest part about it is that even to this day, still people will sometimes um, I will have never told them that I'm a Christian. Not that I'm hiding it. It just, I
Right.
it didn't necessarily come up. But they just know. It's like I've never told them that, and then they just assume I go to church, which is true. And in fact, somebody called me the other day on the phone to do something at a job I've been doing recently, and she told me after the fact that it was a Sunday afternoon, and she called me and she felt hesitant to call me because she knew I was probably at church, and I was like, I never told you I went to church, but she just knew. And so I think all this to say, I'm getting long winded, but basically the point is that
That's good.
to represent Christ, and the way that I tried to forward the kingdom
Mm.
is by making myself an asset to people around me, so that they felt like I was someone they could trust, and basically without them knowing it, I'm representing Christ. And then when push comes to shove down the road, if they are having a bad day or having trouble, or we're just engaged in conversation, I can weave in some things that what I believe,
Yeah.
and they'll hopefully see that difference in me. So
That's phenomenal. Be an asset to the people around you. That is a
that's it.
great mission statement. I might have to steal that. That
Thanks,
is
man. Please
fantastic.
do. Anyone can
It's
have it. Yep.
fantastic. It's fantastic because it's so perfect, but it's so simple and it's
Yep.
not stupid and religious. That's great. And
Yeah.
what I love about it too is, and I know this from, I mean, when we met, my memory of our meeting is ninth grade history class, global
That's right.
history. I
Yep.
turn around, you're wearing, it looked like an Abercrombie and Fitch sweatshirt, but it said a breadcrumb and fish. And I thought,
Breadcrumb
this
and fish.
guy
Yep.
is a serious believer. I mean, of all the people in the world, eighth and ninth graders can be the most ruthless people, and to
Yeah.
represent your faith with a sweatshirt, this guy's the real deal. And I knew, and I was, just fresh from Christian school in this huge public school, and I
That's
thought
right.
we are going to be
Yep.
friends. And so, but you really do love the Lord. You really do love Jesus. You have the whole time I've known you, and so, but I love how you that idea that Jesus is the most valuable asset, right? Like he's an asset to everybody, and that goes back
Hmm.
to that Matthew 20 principle where he says, "The greatest among you be the servant of all. I didn't come to
Yeah.
be served, but to give my life as a ransom." Right, a ransom payment, an asset, an exchange of assets for the value of your life. And but you mobilized that in the mission statement, and walked it out in the military space, the government space. Plus, I love how you, on that mission trip to Romania, you saw it together. You saw that you could serve the Lord and your country at the same time,
Right.
in this way that was a childhood aspiration.
Yep.
That's a profound aha that you had. And so, well, thank you for your service.
Oh yeah.
But
You're welcome.
thank you for sharing that. So, what was the time? Could you think of a time when you had maybe an interaction with a person or a team where you really felt like you were able to be that asset? Like maybe one story that stands out to you where you really, the way you wanted to be an asset for them, you were in a Christ-like way.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little things, and honestly, there's probably more things that I don't know about.
Mm-hmm.
One example I can think of off the top of my head, and if my friend ever watches this, he's gonna know who he is, and it's gonna look like I'm bragging, and I'm not.
I'm
I'm
asking you.
not
I'm trying to
judge if
drag
you
this
know.
out of you, so
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
not. Yeah,
I
you're not bragging.
one specific example that I can think of is so just to give a little bit of background, one of the majority of your time as a fighter pilot is spent in a secure facility, so a place with no windows, one door, and all of the
So that's
secrets,
the
right? And
opposite
so
of what people think, right?
exactly right. That's also important for people to know. And I would spend 12 to 15 hours a day in that vault Monday through Friday. So, except for when you're flying. So, obviously somebody has to be on duty in there. So we would call it the weapons duty officer, where you're basically manning a desk inside of the secure facility, and you're responsible for making sure that the people coming in and out aren't someone trying to steal our secrets, and they should be in there. And you're also the one in charge of like making sure it's closed up properly at the end of the evening when everyone's gone. So that can be kind of a thankless, really not fun job. And so when you're in training, so this happened when I was in F-15 training, and those of us that are students were always the ones doing that job, right? So this was half the course you spend flying at night. So this friend of mine was sitting at the desk, and he was going to be there till probably 11 or 12 at night. At the time, my wife and I didn't have any kids, and he had like I can't remember if he had two or if they had their third kid yet. I think they had two kids at home, and I just thought to myself, it'd be a real bummer if he's got to sit here all night in this dark room for no good reason when he could be home putting his kids to bed. And so I called my wife and I was like, hey, would you be okay if I stay late and sit at the desk for this guy? And she's like, yeah, absolutely, go do it. Um, and then I went in and told him, hey man, you should go home. I got nothing else going on tonight. I'm going to sit at the desk, and you go spend time with your kids and put them to bed. And so, and I truly did that. I try to look for opportunities like that all through my career,
Yeah.
not for the credit, just purely to help people out. And now I'm going to get credit for it because I'm saying it out loud. Um, but
You
that's just a
always been
small
like
example of the
this.
things. So
You were like that with for me when we were in high school. I remember one time we were lifting weights. We love lifting weights together. We
yeah,
were lifting that church basement, and I was,
yeah, that's right.
ego training, and I pulled my levator scap, sprained my neck so bad. And you were so kind that not only you might have laughed like initially, but you you literally held my head and helped me lay down on a bench. Like I
Well, I
still
don't even remember
remember
that,
that.
but
Like
that's
you
crazy. Yeah.
literally held my head and lovingly helped me lay my head down on a bench because I was in such pain. I'll never forget that. And you've always been the kind of person that even like saying this or saying this about you is like makes you uncomfortable because you didn't do it for the credit. And
Yeah.
but I say that I think that this is a profound like, and you're great at teaching it. I think this is a great teaching item for people who feel called to for God's kingdom, but they also have a desire to serve in the military or serve in government or in these places that are certainly not churchy. And
Right.
this gives them a great avenue and a great example for how they might see themselves doing God's kingdom work in those spaces. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's really, really great. I got
Absolutely.
to ask you another question.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we talked earlier, you talked about this idea of being in some cases too humble in a way that might actually not serve the people that you're on a team with or partner with. And it's funny you said it because like what I like about you, Kyle, I like so many things, but the whole time I've known you, you don't have a fighter pilot personality. You're not egotistical. You're not arrogant. You're not narcissistic. You're super other centered and humble. And so we always used to tease you too about that because it's like, well, you don't really have the right quote
That's
personality
right.
to
Yeah.
do this.
Yeah.
And yet here you are, you've done it, and now you're entering into commercial piloting. You've done the thing and done it well. Um, and if I remember correctly, your call name was Shepherd, right? Didn't they make that
Sure.
your call name?
That's right. Yeah.
So like,
Yeah.
what better representation of what you're talking about being an asset to others? But I guess where I was going with that was yeah, you mentioned about being too humble. And can you talk about that and what you discovered that was better than that?
Yeah. Uh, that has always been something on my heart because I didn't want I when you live with arrogance and the pride kind of is clear to people, which we all struggle with pride, right? Like just it's human nature.
It's human.
And
Yep.
right when you aren't aware of it, you're not self-aware and uh, recognizing yourself, other people are going to see it, and then it just really causes a lot of issues. And so I was always really paranoid about that, to a fault, like you just addressed. It was brought to my attention a few different ways. Uh, there's a Navy SEAL commander, Jocko Willink, real famous speaker, if you've ever heard of him, and he talks about humility being not thinking of yourself. Uh, not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. And I always thought that was a really good way of putting it, and so it kind of helped shift my narrative on how I thought about humility and becoming less self-deprecating, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And then two other things happened. I went to a training. When you're a captain in the Air Force, you need to go to an officer school to learn how to be a better leader. And at that training, you get peer feedback. It's part of the course where your peers give you feedback, on paper and cold, hard. Here's what you are bad at, and it's great. And I was told that basically by my flight commander and some of them, it all kind of tied together. Basically, like when I got through that course, my flight commander, the guy in charge of it, told me like, "Hey, if you'd been the same the second half of the course, or sorry, the first half of the course you'd been the second half of the course, you'd have done really well here." Um, because first half I was so afraid of showing up and being like a really arrogant and trying to chase being like number one in the class. I was so afraid of that I actually I went the other direction with it. And he really highlighted that. And so I recognized that, like, man, if you try to be too humble, you become self-deprecating, and then you lose people's respect doing that as well. And then my wife is an amazing, amazing woman. You know her, and man, she is just a saint. And she has done so much for helping me learn more about myself and highlighting things. And she always said that it's essentially insulting. I'm insulting her by being self-deprecating, being the way I am, because it basically says that she did a bad job of assessing and selecting a husband. Because what I'm essentially saying is that when I'm being self-deprecating and saying that, like, well, you settled for me and I'm not a good husband or whatever, right? Then she essentially did a bad job selecting a husband. Is essentially what I'm telling her, and
Mm-hmm.
she can't make her own. She made a bad decision, and so that's insulting to her. And I was like, man, that's so true. And so all those things combined essentially is to say that I had to learn that being too humble really backfires and almost looks like you're having a pity party for yourself, and it can almost sometimes be perceived too that you're just trying to be woe is me, and no one really wants to be around that attitude either. And you can't lead when you're acting that way because nobody's going to trust you then. So you have to find the sweet spot of, like Jocko says, I got to think less. Think of myself less, not think less of yourself. So don't be self-deprecating, but
Mm-hmm.
also consider other people's needs before your own, I guess, is the best way to put that. And it took me
Yeah.
a long time to learn that, and I think I have gotten better at it. I still need some work, but it's a daily battle.
Yeah. So what you were describing this, but I want to know like what mindset have you adopted that allows you to strike that balance between being an asset to those around you without minimizing yourself, but showing up powerfully to be that asset.
Yeah,
How-
that's good. So I wouldn't say there's one specific thing, but the general mindset is that uh, if I have found throughout my career, there have been so many times where I have tried to live that, be an asset out. I feel like I'm failing and not doing a good job. And time again, I would find out when I'd have feedback with my commanders or something. They would say, "Hey, you're top of this class. You're doing a really good job." And then these opportunities would open themselves up because I was doing a good job, and I had no idea. Like I really just thought I was, whatever, not doing a good job. And so what I learned from that is that I need to stop viewing myself so low and just focus on being that asset and being helpful to the people around me. And they're not going to care what I look like or that I lost my hair or that I'm, maybe I'm not the best at this whatever other thing. But if if I'm treating people well, I'm exercising the golden rule, treating other people how you want to be treated, right, which is biblical,
Mhm.
and focusing on those things, then I can know in my heart, and I can know in my mind and my psyche and my conscience and the way I view myself, that like if I focus on those things and focus on being a Christ follower and emulating
Mhm.
how he lived to the best of my ability, right, knowing that I'm going to
Mhm.
fail, then I have no reason to walk into a room and not feel confident
Mhm.
in myself, because that confidence can be derived from just having my identity in Christ and being focused on living how he would live, because I know I've seen the evidence now of how that works out. And people don't hate you for that, and they don't sit there and think like, oh, that guy, um I don't know, whatever self-deprecating thing you can come up with in the moment, that like they're probably just thinking about how I don't have any hair. That's not what anyone's thinking. They're thinking like, hopefully they're thinking like, oh, he's been really helpful. Anyway, so all that to say, the mindset is that um, focus on being helpful to people and being an asset to them,
Yeah.
and you can be confident that you're, as long as you're doing it for the right reasons and focusing on that they're going to view you in a positive light, and then try to be. I'm for the word is escaping me. Introspective. Work on it. Try to be introspective so that
Mhm.
you don't miss the opportunities to work on yourself when the time comes. So
It's so good. That's and this is I think this conversation, what things you've shared have been a tremendous asset to people who are listening, because the things you've shared can work anywhere in any setting, no matter how technical or specialized it is, or um, how non-Christian it is.
mhm.
And it's and no one, like those things you shared about serving others, being an asset to others, being Christ-like. And the other major theme I hear is service, like you said, servant-oriented leadership. And the other major theme is you're just passionate about learning and growing. And I think
Yeah,
the common denominator of all those things is no one can stop you from doing any of them. No one can do them for you. And those things in general will always work and always help you be successful, and especially successful at expanding God's kingdom. And that people would know something of Jesus, even if it's just a Jesus like example
yeah,
through being like that. So thank you, Kyle. Thank you so much for sharing this, and um, sharing your life, and where you've been and how it's gone, and um, how you forward God's kingdom as a fighter pilot. And if you're out there, if people are watching this and you're in government, or you're in military, or you aspire to, I just encourage you to go for it. I encourage you, if that's a desire of your heart and you want to do it for Jesus, go for it. Like Kyle said, do it to the glory of God, and have that mindset to be an asset to those around you. And um, the people around you, that circle will only grow as you continue to do that, and do that for real, and not just for the credit, but just to bless other people.
yeah.
So,
That's right.
well, thank you for
Yeah.
your time today, Kyle. Any final remarks?
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on one thing you said there that I was going to try to weave into the conversation that I missed.
Mm.
To anyone who is just wrestling with, how to live, walk as a Christ follower, and then that feels maybe the burden to what career path are they going to go into, or maybe they're in a career change or something. I heard a great sermon years back when I was in college, and the pastor basically talked about, I think we as humans always view God with like a dart board up in heaven, and there's a bullseye in the center, and he's just standing there watching us making these decisions with our lives and hoping we hit the bullseye in the exact thing that he has ordained for us in our lives. And I think we really, really handcuff ourselves and give ourselves undue burden. And I think that's actually Satan's influence in our lives, making us feel like we are going to screw up God's plans if we don't hit the bullseye with our decision making and our career paths and decisions. God's will for our lives is not a bullseye. It is, we're not going to ruin his plans if we don't pick the exact career path. If I had picked something else and not been a fighter pilot, guess what? God would have used me in that avenue as well.
That's
And
good.
we don't you don't ministry is everywhere. You don't have to necessarily
Yes.
go be a missionary to Thailand or whatever to be achieving God's call in your life. Like we need Christians everywhere. And so
Yeah.
so don't handcuff yourself to feeling like you got to hit the bullseye. And if you don't, you're going to screw up God's plans and he's going to abandon you, because no matter where he's leading you or where you feel called, you're probably feeling that calling because that's where he wants you to go, even if it means being a fighder pilot. Because at initial glance, it doesn't feel like the place to go as a Christian. But anyway,
Yeah.
so
That's
that's
so
it.
good. So good. Well, thank you, Kyle. I think this is
Awesome.
a great place to land the plane. And for everyone who's watching or listening by podcast, thank you so much for your time and attention. And go and do likewise. Expand the kingdom of God and shine the light of Christ wherever he may call you. Thanks for joining us. I want to encourage you to please like this show, subscribe to the channel, and comment in the comments below. I want to hear what hit you, what helped you, what blessed you. And if you have any questions, please put them in the comments. We'd love to hear your questions, especially questions regarding how to hear God's voice, how to step into your calling, and how to more faithfully, powerfully represent Jesus in love and the power of the Holy Spirit to the world around you. Please put those comments there. We look at the comments to help us develop more content that really serves you wherever it is that God's called you.